about look at Diddy, for instance. Let's take a look at him. Let's take a look at. He has videos. He has videos of the parties. Now, what I've heard, which I don't know how much of it is in mainstream media, I don't really follow the story that much, but what I've heard from friends that are attorneys, friends of mine that have represented me before, agents and so on, is there's a bidding war going on right now.
The fall of Sean Diddy Combs looks like something out of a script that even Hollywood would have tossed aside for being too outlandish. The empire he built on glamour, bravado, and billion-dollar branding is now collapsing under the weight of federal indictments, court filings that read like thrillers, and whispers that he wasn't just a playboy mogul, but the mastermind behind one of the darkest mysteries in music history. Prosecutors say racketeering, exploitation rings, and secret tapes could put him behind bars for life. His name has surfaced nearly 50 times in sealed police transcripts connected to the ambush that ended Shakur's reign in Las Vegas. And while Diddy pleads innocence in a New York courtroom, former allies are starting to talk loudly.
I think that they don't want, if they was in any of those freak-off tapes, if they played a part in any of those Diddy sessions, they don't want it to get out to the general public to make up their brand.
Enter Gene Deal, the ex-bodyguard who saw it all from inside the armored SUV convoys and penthouse suites. Deal has now dropped a revelation so staggering that it makes the charges against Diddy look like just one piece of a far bigger puzzle. According to him, Shakur was never the naive hothead the press painted him to be. He was playing a deeper game. He knew the setup was coming, he understood how high the bounty on his head had climbed, and instead of waiting for his enemies to close in, he staged his own exit. Deal hints that the legendary rapper turned his Machiavelli persona into a blueprint for survival. He deceived his would-be executioners, vanished from American soil, and slipped into a new life abroad under a different name. And here's the kicker. Even Diddy himself, the man who thought he had arranged for Shakur to be erased, was fooled. That is the ultimate irony. Imagine Diddy sitting in boardrooms and basking in platinum plaques, certain he had removed the only rival who could dismantle him, never knowing that the supposed casualty had simply sidestepped the hit. Gene Deal's testimony makes it clear. Diddy may have believed he pulled the strings, but in reality, he was outmaneuvered. The image of him gloating in private, believing he held the crown unchallenged, only to discover decades later that his nemesis might still be alive somewhere, is almost Shakespearean. It reframes the entire East Coast-West Coast saga, shifting it from tragedy into something closer to a long con.
Him and Big went through their thing, and I was big man. That was the extent of our beef.
And the hints were there all along. Fans obsessed over the Don Naughty album, with its eerie subtitle, The 7-Day Theory, and the cryptic line, "Exit Shakur, enter Machiavelli." They pointed out that when you rearrange Machiavelli, it spells out Am Alive K. For years, those details were dismissed as morbid Easter eggs, a young man fixated on death. But what if they were instructions, a public code laid out by an artist who had studied Niccolo Machiavelli's treatises on deception and survival? If Deal is right, the album wasn't a requiem, it was a declaration of intent. Consider, too, the strange inconsistencies that surfaced in official records. The coroner's report listed Shakur at 6 feet tall, 215 pounds, but friends and family knew him as 5'10", 168. The autopsy photo with its blurred tattoos and awkward angles never sat right with the public. And then there's the cremator who supposedly handled Shakur's remains, retiring immediately afterward, vanishing without a trace. That single disappearance became the spark for decades of rumor. Was the man silenced because he played a part in swapping bodies? Was the supposed corpse even Shakur at all?
I'm sorry, I'm just really, I'm in this moment right now. This is crazy. Sorry. People don't really know how much what it does to you when something that you love is taken from you and thrown away like it don't even matter, and then they move on with their lives and you're stuck. You're stuck. During those years, you're still stuck 21 years later.
Stories multiply when you look beyond the paperwork. One former security officer, Michael Nice, swore to TMZ that he personally helped smuggle Shakur out of the country after a hit was ordered. He claimed Fidel Castro sanctioned the operation and even signed off on a body switch to sell the illusion. According to Nice, Shakur wasn't gunned down in Vegas. He was spirited onto a jet with Panthers at his side, flown to Barbados, and finally delivered to Cuba. He remembered Shakur himself acting as co-pilot, shaking hands with his rescuers, as if stepping straight into his own legend. Nice was later found gone under mysterious circumstances, just as he'd promised to reveal proof. Convenient coincidence? Or another casualty in the effort to keep the secret buried? And yet, the sightings keep rolling in. Havana locals whisper of seeing a man who looks uncannily like Shakur, strolling old Havana in a bandana and sunglasses, the beard thicker, the shoulders broader, but the eyes unmistakable. Others insist he's been spotted in Belize, even New Jersey. The internet still circulates images of Shakur standing next to Beyonce or 50 Cent, grainy and easily dismissed as doctored, but compelling enough to feed the fire. Suge Knight himself once mused from behind bars, "Why you think nobody been arrested if they said they the one that took Shakur out? Because Shakur not gone, he's somewhere smoking a Cuban cigar." The more we trace these threads, the more it feels like we're staring at an elaborate stage play rather than a crime scene. Even Shakur's own mother once said her son chose to leave quietly. What did she mean? Was it a slip, a poetic turn of phrase, or a coded acknowledgement that he walked away on his own terms? And how do we explain the endless stream of posthumous albums, each one sounding uncannily fresh, as though the voice behind them was never silenced at all?
And then what's the stuff that's happening with Wendy Williams? Do you think this is all connection too?
Of course.
All of this leads us back to Gene Deal's assertion that Shakur wasn't caught off guard, but saw the betrayal coming. He knew the cost of independence in an industry where moguls played kingmakers and enforcers in equal measure. He refused to bow, and when the bounty on his head reached into the millions, he flipped the game board over entirely. He turned Machiavelli from a stage name into a survival manual. And he might have built an exile life far from the cameras, which means the greatest twist of all is still possible. Shakur returning when the timing is right, ready to expose the men who thought they had destroyed him. The first cracks in the illusion came through the story of a body double. Rumors spread that another man, already deceased, was swapped into Shakur's hospital bed to stage the final act. The coroner's discrepancies became the evidence. The rushed cremation, the smoking gun. In this theory, the chaos outside the hospital that night wasn't panic, it was choreography. By the time Suge Knight walked out with bandages and shock on his face, Shakur was already on his way to a runway hidden under aliases, sliding into the Caribbean night. The world was left with blurred photos and official statements, while the man himself slipped beyond reach. And now, as Diddy sits shackled by federal charges, accused of coercion, trafficking, and running his empire like a criminal enterprise, the irony burns hotter than ever. He may genuinely believe he orchestrated the perfect crime back in 1996, that he rid himself of the West Coast threat once and for all, but if Shakur is truly out there, waiting, watching, then Diddy has been living a hollow victory. And if the day comes when Shakur steps back into the spotlight, revealing the greatest vanishing act in music history, everything Diddy built will collapse in an instant. Because nothing would haunt him more than realizing the man he thought was gone had been alive all along.
Unfortunately, we're all going to take a disgusting trip to his seedy, awful world. You know, the man has no class. He has no kindness in his dark, dark heart. And he's depraved, that's my opinion. This is a depraved, disgusting individual about whom I wish to hear nothing after this trial is done.
The discrepancies, the whispered confessions, the sightings, the autopsy oddities, they all collide into a single unnerving possibility. What if the night in Vegas was never an ending, but a beginning? What if the bullets were just the backdrop for a disappearing act pulled off with the precision of a master strategist? What if the real Shakur has been living under our noses for nearly 3 decades, waiting for the perfect moment to re-emerge? And if that's true, then the story isn't over. In fact, it may only just be reaching the point where Diddy's darkest fears come to life. Behind the swirling smoke of theories, there's one thread that feels impossible to ignore: the Black Panthers. Shakur wasn't just an artist pulled into industry feuds. He was born into a family steeped in activism and rebellion. His mother, Afeni Shakur, was a Panther herself, and his godfather was a militant organizer who spent decades in conflict with federal agencies. With roots that deep, it's not hard to imagine a safety net waiting when his life in LA became too dangerous. Some insiders insist the night of the Vegas shooting wasn't just chaos. It was the trigger for a carefully executed extraction, carried out by people who had spent their lives working in the shadows. If any network had the means, the discipline, and the motivation to sneak him out under the government's nose, it was them. And what better symbol of resistance than preserving the life of the most outspoken rapper of his generation?
So, Terrence Howard appeared on the PBD podcast with Patrick Bet-David, and the episode, this premiered on April 4th. Definitely making the rounds because in this episode, Terrence Howard describes an interaction with Diddy where he says that he believes that Diddy was trying to have sex with him. Let's take a listen.
That connection gains weight when we consider his aunt, Assata Shakur, who remains one of the most wanted women in America after escaping a prison sentence and resurfacing in Cuba. If she could vanish from federal custody and find protection on an island sworn to defy Washington, why couldn't her nephew follow the same path? It's whispered that the same channels that smuggled Asada to Havana were later reopened for Shakur. For the Panthers, it wasn't just about saving a famous voice. It was about protecting a legacy, shielding the son of the movement, and ensuring his words could never be silenced completely. Every lyric about fighting the system, every verse about refusing to bow, it all became proof that he was more than an entertainer. He was a symbol they could not afford to lose. That brings us back to Michael Nice, the man who came forward with a story almost too cinematic to believe. He described Shakur boarding a private jet flanked by Panther operatives, with adrenaline in the air like prisoners escaping a fortress. Nice said, "It was me, my brother, the pilot, Shakur as the co-pilot, and 2 Panther guys on the jet. We took off and immediately knew we were safe. We felt good, and it was like escaping from prison." According to his account, the operation wasn't improvised, it was sanctioned. He claimed Fidel Castro himself signed off on the plan, setting conditions for Shakur's exile. Stay quiet, never admit he was alive, never risk exposure that could drag Cuba into international scandal.
Same thing for Jeffrey Epstein. Now, the interesting thing about the Epstein and the theory about Epstein is we know he filmed people for sure on that island. He has a lot of movies, a lot of films of people that are very, very powerful political figures, and entertainers, business people. So, do you really believe that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself? Of
course not.
Of course not.
Yeah.
But here's where the plot thickens. Just when Michael Nice promised he was about to reveal hard proof, he was reported gone. Fans who followed his interviews don't see that as coincidence. Was it failing health, bad luck, or was he silenced to ensure the truth about Shakur's survival stayed buried forever? Nice's own colleagues admitted his passing came at the most convenient moment possible, preventing documents, tapes, or testimony from ever reaching the public eye. When someone that close to the fire disappears suddenly, suspicion doesn't fade, it spreads. Even the details Nice revealed before his exit raised chilling possibilities. He spoke about a body switch in the hospital, large sums of money changing hands, and a double being used to play the part of a lifeless Shakur. He described the moment of relief once the jet reached Barbados, before the final handoff to Cuba. If those claims are accurate, it would mean the entire Vegas spectacle was a cover, an elaborate theater piece staged for the media, while the real man was already slipping across international waters. The Panthers provided the muscle, Castro provided the sanctuary, and Shakur provided the deception. The perfect trinity for survival.
I can't wait. I can't wait for everybody to find out what's really been going on in the background.
Life in exile is never as romantic as the rumors make it sound. For someone like Shakur, a man who thrived on public energy and constant reinvention, being forced into decades of silence would not just be a strategy, it would be a punishment. Cut off from the roar of crowds, stripped of the adrenaline of performance, every day would feel like a slow erosion of identity. Exile demands invisibility, and invisibility can suffocate. The longer he stayed hidden, the more the charismatic poet of the 90s may have hardened into something else entirely, shaped by solitude and secrecy rather than applause. Psychologists often describe long-term isolation as a kind of rebirth. The person who enters hiding rarely emerges the same, if they emerge at all. For Shakur, the transformation could have been profound. His art was always about rebellion and survival, but exile might have sharpened those instincts into something darker: paranoia, distrust, a constant awareness that betrayal could strike again. Decades of blending into the background, watching the world evolve without him, might have turned him into an observer rather than a participant. The Shakur that fans worshipped was young, fiery, unafraid. The Shakur of today, if he lives, may be someone whose fire burns differently. Less as a blaze, more as a slow, relentless ember.
There's different things that's not really beef though. That's just competitive.
Competitiveness. All right. So you and Diddy, you and Puff cool?
No, I don't really rock with him.
Okay.
And that raises a haunting question. If he were to step out of hiding now, would we even recognize him? Not just in the lines on his face or the weight of years, but in his very essence. Could a man shaped by decades of enforced silence and secrecy still embody the same ideals? Or would he return with a worldview warped by exile? Perhaps his reemergence would shock us not because he is alive, but because he is unrecognizable. A man forged in shadows, carrying truths too heavy for the stage he once dominated. That possibility makes the stakes of his return even higher, because what confronts Diddy may not be the Shakur of the past, but a version molded by survival itself. Now we face the darker question: why has he stayed hidden for so long? If exile was meant to protect him, why not return once the danger faded? That's where the story collides with Diddy again. In some versions of the tale, Diddy gave Shakur a brutal ultimatum: disappear or face a permanent end. The alleged bounty, the so-called millions for a head, was more than just a gangland rumor. It was a warning that there would be no safe corner of America for him. Forced to choose between vanishing and risking a public showdown, Shakur picked exile. In a twisted way, Diddy's own ambition might have been the spark that forced the legend into hiding, transforming what should have been a grim finale into one of the greatest disappearances in music history.
Is he this gangster that behind the scenes is that him? Or is that
Shout out to Wendy Williams.
Imagine the irony. The mogul who believed he had erased his rival may have instead created the conditions for his survival. For decades, Diddy paraded untouchable wealth, calling himself a king while federal investigators circled while accusers lined up with stories of coercion and intimidation. And all the while, somewhere out there, the man he feared most may have been watching, waiting, collecting evidence, and preparing for the moment the world is finally ready to see him again. The whispers now are bolder than ever. Some theorists believe Shakur has a trove of unreleased footage, testimonies, and written accounts hidden away, a bombshell archive that could obliterate Diddy's remaining defenses if it ever surfaced. Others argue he has been carefully planning his return, waiting for the exact moment when his reappearance would carry maximum impact. And with Diddy's empire in flames, with federal prosecutors circling, and former allies turning against him, that moment may be approaching fast. So we're left with the question that keeps millions awake at night. What happens if Shakur steps out of the shadows tomorrow? Would the sight of him standing at a microphone, alive and unbroken, finally collapse the last pieces of Diddy's empire? Could he reveal a hidden history that rewrites everything we thought we knew about the East Coast-West Coast war? Or would his return ignite chaos, exposing how far those in power went to bury the truth? If that day comes, it won't just be music history rewritten, it will be cultural history detonated in real time. And maybe that's what Diddy fears most, sitting in a cell with headlines closing in, not just the verdict of a court, but the return of the one man he thought he'd defeated forever. So tell us, if Shakur reappears, does Diddy's empire crumble instantly, or does the world rally behind a legend who fooled them all? Drop your theories in the comments and keep your eyes open because the next headline might be the one that proves everything. Until then, stay sharp, stay curious, and we'll see you in the shadows.